Oh, thank you, Porter Wagner. This song could be really about a number of the valences kind of floating around in the political atmosphere right now. Could maybe even sum up how Joe Biden is feeling. We're going to talk today about the fact that, yes, you are drinking from a historical fire hose now. Things are happening very fast, things that don't necessarily have exact precedents. And we're going to try to help you think about that a little bit. We've got 5 guests, so we're going to have to go rather swiftly through them. We're going to begin with our favorite in-house sort of political savant, Bill Curry. Bill Curry, former White House advisor in the Clinton administration, 2-time Democratic nominee for Governor of Connecticut, many other things besides columnist, writer, blah, blah, blah. So, Bill Curry, we've been sort of talking about this steadily since, I don't know, at some point yesterday afternoon when everybody started talking about this. And I know that one of the things that you have really advocated for months and months and months, stretching probably back at least into late 2023, is the idea of going to an open convention, which seems gradually to be taken off the table here. But how are you feeling about it right now?
First of all, I wish the word gradual were applicable. It seems like it's moving awfully fast to me. And I would say late last year, I was advocating a challenge to President Biden. And the principal reason was that he seemed to me then to be infirm. I didn't think it was doctored Fox videos. All of us who've had experience with loved ones who've suffered early stages of various strains of senile dementia recognize that in answer to Nancy Pelosi's question, is it an episode or a condition? It's never an episode. It's always a condition, and it only moves one way. And I also feel that that wasn't the only issue. I feel like in recent years, my entire party is suffering cognitive decline, and that it really needs a new deal of its own, a new vision, a new platform. And there's only one way to get that, and that's in a presidential election. So it has been moving. After I looked for a challenger and spoke to prospective challengers and nobody saw an opening, I began asking for an open convention. This happens to be the 200th anniversary of the very first Democratic convention, 1824, and none of them has ever gone badly. The Biden people especially talked about the chaos, the dark cries of chaos, and we can never ever do it. And there have been problems. In 1968, the country was divided over Vietnam and civil rights and youth culture. And there were problems outside the hall, but nothing in the hall went wrong. In 72, McGovern was abandoned by all the party moderates, voters and elites alike. But the convention wasn't the problem. And we know how to do this. And the delegates feel a real sense of responsibility. They're not going to let us down. The democracy's at stake. And so I really felt that the best thing for Kamala Harris, by the way, and I'll just wrap this up. So, the mistake I thought we were making with Biden was looking at an 81-year-old candidate and not having him just trot around the track a couple of times just to show he still could. There have been reservations about Harris. I think having her trot around the track a couple of times would be good. And I think that having a convention that is a robust showcase of grassroots democracy could put the wind at her or any of the nominees back.
So when you say trot around the track, what you mean is be challenged by somebody, have
a couple of forums. So the easy thing, again, people talk about how hard it is, as opposed to all the party leaders jumping in nanoseconds to be a part of the winning team. And in politics, you have to remember what everybody wants most is to be in the group photo with the winner. Mm-hmm. And so that impulse just took over. If instead all the delegates have been emailed and asked what their choices were, and the top 6 were invited to a couple of real forums, which I think, again, in the mood I sense in the country and our party, would have been positive and substantive. You could have had them moderated, one by Barack Obama, another by Bill Clinton, and then have the delegates come in. And just like they did every year from 1824 to 1968, let them have a series of ballots. For people who follow this closely, they know there was an issue about superdelegates or governors, congressmen, senators, et cetera, who were not allowed to vote in the first ballot in the last convention. I'd invite them to be a part of it because it's a moment when we need everybody's experience and wisdom. So anyway, that was the idea. I realized I've heard from a score of my friends this morning that the water's draining out of that tub. But we can still have an open convention around platform. There are 3 issues here. We always focus on the person, but there's also the process and above all the platform. Joe Biden was in trouble before the debate. I believe because our policies have not done enough to address the real problems of the working middle class. We have not really challenged the status quo on the fundamental distribution of wealth, income, power, and opportunity. And that's because we're too driven by our own donors. And if we could come up with, and that's why the people like J.D. Vance and Trump are constantly stealing our thunder on populist economic issues. And they're not stealing it, we're gifting it to them. And so having the party stop and just ask itself, what is the DNA of this party? And what is it we really want to say right now? An open platform process would even be a real improvement over where we are right now. I think.
I'm going to ask you to kind of step back from that. And unfortunately, our time is limited here. But, a while back, I guess in a previous election cycle, we asked you to give our listeners a pep talk about the importance of voting. And you did a great job, and everybody loved it. And Steve Inskeep wanted a copy of it. It was just big. It was big.
I hope you didn't give him one.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
he can do his own show. He's got people. No, but right now people are kind of panicking. I think some people are panicking. It feels kind of chaotic. Some of them really weren't ready for Biden to make this big move. Some of them not sure about Harris. I don't know. Can you give the nation a pep talk right now about what's going to happen over the next 10 weeks and how to react to it?
Unlike yesterday and every day of the last year, at least among Democrats, they almost don't need it this morning. People talked about the great, the threat, the looming threat of chaos. I think what millions and millions of voters are feeling this morning is that a cloud is lifted. And I think the party's feeling a burst of energy. And I would just say to everyone listening, this is truly, without hyperbole of any kind, the most important election in American history. And we are so privileged to be citizens at such a moment. This is such an opportunity for us to give something back and to fight for all the things that really made America great. And so I've gone from being out and out depressed a couple of weeks ago to waking up this morning and thinking, we're in this game. And all the young voters whom I talked to in the last 6 months who were walking away, they're at least looking back over their shoulders. I think they're going to be back in this with us. And I think that is one of the things that Harris brings to this as well as anybody could. So let's ride that energy. It's going to be white knuckle all the way to the finish line. We don't do landslides anymore in American politics. We only do photo finishes. And so this is no time for spectators. Everybody's got to pitch in. And if we do, we're going to win the biggest victory any of us ever saw.
All right. Magnificent once again. We have to wrap here, though. Bill Curry, former presidential advisor in the Clinton White House, two-time Democratic nominee for governor, writer, columnist, all that stuff. Thanks for talking to us. We're going to segue here because, there's no medium like radio for talking about visuals. And one of our favorite people to go to about this is Hunter Schwartz, a journalist and the founder and curator of the visual politics newsletter Yellow. It's YELLO. And he's going to join us now, talk a little bit about the visual shift towards the potential presidency or presidential nomination of Kamala Harris. So, Hunter Schwartz, I've been following your work, as you know, for a really, really long time. Yesterday must have been almost an unprecedented opportunity for you to watch kind of in real time, like an egg hatching into a chick, the first stirrings of the rebranding. And maybe we could begin by just talking about the fact that we saw coming out of the shell, among other things, a new slogan that had less to do with let's finish the job we started and was a much more simple statement. Let's win this. What was your take on everything you saw there?
Yeah, I spent a lot of yesterday just refreshing all of the campaign sites to see when they would update things. And it was kind of throughout the day, it was kind of like you saw new things get dropped. And one of the first new visuals we saw out of the Harris campaign was kind of the "Let's win this" slogan. The vice president changed her social media banner images to that slogan, and it's kind of like, all right, we're off to the races. And like the Biden campaign shop it was kind of funny to watch that throughout the day because it was initially they didn't make any changes to it, and then eventually they moved all their pre-existing Harris merch up to the top, and then they eventually added in this new logo. So yeah, it was kind of you could see in real time how the campaign's design team was like getting ready for an entirely new presidential campaign.
There's the campaign branding and merchandise that one plans, and increasingly there's all this stuff that's kind of user generated, which can be very powerful, can be very helpful. In 2008, which was kind of the first cycle where a lot of people had smartphones, you saw the rise of Obama Girl, some of the other stuff that was just, it was spontaneous, it was created by users. And there already seems to be kind of a playfulness on TikTok and other areas of social media depicting Kamala Harris as this kind of goofy wine aunt who's fun, and amusing. There's also kind of an attempt going on to link her to the Brat branding, the Charlie XCX album that seems to be kind of the vibe of the summer. This is really important, right? If you can have a successful kind of symbiosis with the user-generated content and your own planned branding, you have kind of a force multiplier. But say more about that.
Yeah, well, we had kind of two visual elements that popped up yesterday. The first was kind of the standard campaign logo, and that was very much like you can tell that they're using one of the same fonts that the Biden campaign used, called Decimal. So there's some continuity there, and kind of I feel like visually it really gives off this safe and familiar look. But then they're also playing with, like you said, with Brat, the Charlie X6 album, the kind of that green color she uses, and the campaign uses it for their Kamala HQ account, which is a rapid response account to kind of go after your opponents, respond to the news of the day, and so they're having some fun with that. And so I feel like what you really get here is you get kind of that more traditional Biden-Harris campaign branding that's now for the Harris campaign, and then kind of this evidence of the fact that they're playing with Brat kind of shows that Harris is able to kind of play into meme culture, into youth culture in a way that I don't think that Biden would have been able to do.
And I think you could even strip that down one layer and say that a lot of the messaging, both overtly and subliminally, of the Biden campaign leading up to this moment was kind of a language of goaltending, to try to keep the other guy out of the goal, try to keep Trump out of there, and also kind of a dutiful, do your homework, let's finish the job we started. There's a pretty abrupt transition to excitement and fun. It seems as though one of the things that we're being told here in the first 24 hours or so is this really could be a lot of fun, which I'm guessing, a certain segment of the American public would be ready for. We should say Trump does a pretty good job of this on his side. He makes it seem like fun.
Yeah, and I think that was something that was missing from the Democratic side. I mean, these past 2 weeks, it was a lot of anxiety over Biden's debate performance, and so all of a sudden you have kind of with Harris, you have both the benefits of incumbency. And I do think that Biden-Harris campaign brand really was built, like it was built for an incumbent. You have kind of this red, blue, and cream color palette. They use a lot of like handwritten kind of marks and stuff that I feel like gives it kind of like a presidential look to it. It feels like branding that was kind of built for incumbency. And then you do have this kind of this new voice with what Harris is going to be able to do as a candidate on her own. And so I do think you get kind of the best of both worlds with this. You get Harris is able to run on the Biden-Harris administration record. She's able to draw from that. She's able to kind of build on the continuity of that while also bringing something new. And then Democrats can now run as change candidates in a way that they couldn't in a time that seems like it's very anti-incumbent.
One of the things you've highlighted, Hunter Schwarz, on your Twitter feed or your X feed today was, and it's unusual post 1988 for us to get particularly excited about Time magazine covers, but there's a kind of kicky Time magazine cover for August 5th, I believe, and it kind of shows Biden walking out of the frame on the right and Harris walking into it. And I got to think the Harris campaign feels pretty good about the look of that.
Yeah, it's interesting also kind of looking at at these elections that have happened in other countries where it really is about like people are upset with the status quo. And so having this new candidate walking in, I think that that's what this time cover really shows. Like it's a passing of the baton. There's something new. And I think that adds a level to excitement for the Democratic base that you just didn't have 2 weeks ago.
We should also talk about a problem that the Trump campaign has. It exists in a very material sense and probably in a less material sense, just at the level of concept. And that is so much of everything that they have done and planned to do was all about the destruction and discrediting of Joe Biden. Maybe you can say what you see there.
Yeah, I think they kind of built a campaign strategy assuming that they were going to face off against Biden, and that's very much. I mean, we saw it a lot during the Republican National Convention. Like a big one of the signs they held up was Biden equals strong. Trump equals strong. Biden equals weak. Like that was kind of a big message that they were planning on running on. And so now that there's the potential for them running against a much younger candidate, you kind of have to throw out that whole rule book. And even going through the Trump campaign merch, like they have quite a few items that are Biden themed, like a Joe Biden owes me gas money bumper sticker. They kind of have a lot of this stuff that's like you can tell they were really ready to run against Biden, and you got to kind of develop a new strategy now with the potential of facing a new opponent.
You know, I'm going to ask you a question that might not be fair because I'm not sure you've had time to think about this yet. But another person who has to rebrand a little bit is Joe Biden. He is now going to be an incumbent president. He's now going to be a person who's no longer striving to win an election. And I wonder if just off the top of your head, you have any thoughts about that, ways in which he can communicate to the public and through any kind of visual signing or whatever, that he's a different person now.
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I mean, my gut tells me he's in a strong position. I think when you were no longer running for office, when you were no longer in the day-to-day of politics, like an ex-president, your public opinion of you rises a lot. I mean, I think Barack Obama is one of the most influential people in politics because he's out of the day-to-day. And so I do wonder to what extent does Biden benefit from that? With him not in the race, you know, do people look at him more fondly? You know, and you kind of compare that with Trump, where he doesn't have any former Republican presidents on his side. George W. Bush was not speaking at the Republican National Convention, but you now have the potential for a sitting and former presidents to back the nominee on the Democratic side. And so I do think that could be a big benefit for Biden no longer running.
All right, Hunter Schwarz, love your work, as you know. I encourage people to subscribe to the Visual Politics newsletter, Yellow. It's the color, but with no W. Hunter Schwarz is a journalist and the founder, indeed, of that Yellow newsletter. Thanks for your time today. We're going to grab a break. We're going to talk a little bit about, in particular, about how race, ethnicity, gender will become, in fact, a theme. All right, we are back. And yes, obviously, Kamala Harris is now the prohibitive favorite to be the Democratic nominee. And this brings up a whole bunch of new issues, and I think also changes a lot of the vibrations within the campaign. We have two people here to talk about that from similar perspectives, but also slightly different perspective. So it's so great to welcome back to this show and to CT Public in general, Leah Wright-Rigueur, somebody I haven't actually seen since the pandemic, I think, but an associate professor of history at Johns Hopkins, author of The Loneliness of the Black Republican, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power. Leah, good to hear your voice again.
Oh, it's great to be back. And Colin, I can't believe it's been that long.
I think it has been, though. All right. Yes. No, I miss seeing what kind of eyewear you've picked out lately. Leah always has the best glasses in politics. So yesterday, one thing that happened almost immediately was a kind of enthusiasm that you can count because it came in the form of money. Say a little bit about what you saw the minute Biden endorsed Harris. It became clear that she would be the favorite. People expressed their enthusiasm with words, but also with donations.
With donations. And I cannot overstate this. So, one of the ways that we look at enthusiasm behind candidates is the kind of money that they can rack up and in what amount of time. And I would point out, one of the big things that happened around Biden is that one of the super PACs for Biden-Harris froze their money, froze $90 million. They said, you're not touching this until we get what we want. And in the hours immediately following Biden's announcement and then his endorsement of Kamala Harris, what we saw was over $50 million raised. And that's not just from the money through Act Blue, which is the fundraising arm of the Democratic Party, but it also includes $1.5 million that was raised by Win with Black Women on a call that came out of a call that had 34,000 people on it that happened around 8 p.m. Eastern time last night. So suffice to say, people are putting their money where their mouths are. There is an enormous amount of enthusiasm around this announcement around Biden and Kamala Harris. And I think it's also safe to say that there is a growing movement that has the potential to turn into something really powerful that is building around the force of Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, I mean, I think that word enthusiasm is important. I'm going to keep coming back to this today, but it did feel for quite a while as though the Biden candidacy was essentially a defensive candidacy. It was just vote for him so that Trump doesn't become president. This feels different already, right? You've got a bunch of people who were saying, 48 hours ago, well, that's not a good enough reason, and I don't really like either one of these people, and I might just stay home or leave the line blank. I don't think we're in that Kansas anymore, Leah.
No, and I'll tell you one thing that Kamala Harris has been doing over the course of the last year and a half that has really contributed to this. She's essentially become the spokesperson for choice measures with the White House and the promise, right, of this idea of bringing choice back to the American public and reestablishing their reproductive rights. So she's been very, very strong on this. The messaging on this has hit home. She's also been the voice of talking to America about the power of elderly or geriatric or older voters. So I think when you combine these two demographics that are really important, not just to elections overall, but to swing states, now all of a sudden we're talking about a different ballgame.
As you were watching this all unfold yesterday, obviously it wasn't a huge surprise, but it was a little bit surprising the speed with which Harris seemed to lay claim and get claim to the nomination. I don't know, as a historian, were you already kind of maybe salivating a little bit, thinking this is going to be really interesting to teach and write about? We're in a new chapter of American politics.
We absolutely are. And I would caution anyone who's trying to make the comparison to 1968 or even to 2016. History is not destiny. And, I know everyone is sick of hearing it, but we are in uncharted territories. There is no apt comparison to the moment that we find ourselves in now. We said that before when Biden was still in the race. We've never had two candidates this old. Now we're back in the same position. We've never had a candidate this old running for president of the United States against a woman who is Black, who is Indian, who has a successful record in the Senate and has an enormous amount of money behind her. So we are essentially living through history, much to everyone's consternation. But I do think that there's a measure, Colin, you said you were going to keep coming back to it. So am I. I think there is a new level of enthusiasm that can't be discounted around this, that certainly historians and political scientists are all over.
Let's talk about the not so sunny part of this. This is going to kick a lot of tripwires that exist in the American psyche. Tripwires about women, tripwires about people of color, tripwires about both Black Americans and Desi American people. Maybe you can say a little bit about this. This is within the scope of your study as well. And we might think that it's less than it used to be or that it's gone away. I think we might be about to find out that it still exists pretty venomously.
Yes, and I think we saw this on full display with the Obama presidency. Some of those criticisms of the Obama presidency, which came from the left and the right, are valid policy-based, ideologically based criticisms. But we also know that there was an entirely new subset of critique that was firmly rooted in race. The fact that you have a man named Barack Hussein Obama running at the top of the ticket, eventually being elected to the most powerful position in the world. And so I think in that moment, when Barack Obama was elected, many of us had this kind of were lulled into a false assumption about what it meant about America, that America could finally elect a Black man. And what we saw very quickly is that there's a good portion of America that had significant and severe problems with having a Black man in that most powerful position. So one can only imagine what's going to happen when you have a Black woman at the top of the ticket. All of those things are going to come to the fore. The other thing that I'll point out is that the person who has been the standard bearer of all of those kind of really dark and what were once fringe but are now mainstream attitudes, particularly around identity politics, is currently the presidential nominee for the Republican Party. There's no longer this kind of dog whistle politics. It is now megaphone politics, and it is very clear. And I think now that you have these two in direct opposition to one another, we are going to see an enormous amount of attacks that are rooted in Kamala Harris's race, in her ethnicity, who she's married to, her gender, her age. And we're going to hear them qualified in language. In fact, we've already seen it, I think, in some respects, where people say, well, she's unqualified. Why is she unqualified? She actually has a better resume than anyone in the contest right now. So I think we're beginning to see these things. And certainly as the GOP is struggling to find its feet with how they should, quote unquote, attack Kamala Harris, one of the things that they are going to stumble into, and that they've already stumbled into, is the race and gender question.
Let me just ask one quick question, then we have to go, which is, it'll be interesting, and maybe you have thoughts, maybe not, to see what role Barack Obama does play now. I mean, he's been obviously an enthusiastic backer of Harris in the past under certain circumstances. He is still a politician who generates a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. But I also wonder whether he's exactly the right message bearer. It might even seem like he was kind of trying to speak for her.
Well, I think two things happened yesterday that were really important. Barack Obama issued a statement congratulating Joe Biden and calling him an honorable American and thanking him for stepping down. He stopped short of endorsing Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris then issued her own statement where she thanked Joe Biden, and she said, I look forward to competing and earning the right to be the Democratic nominee to be president of the United States. And those two things are interrelated. I think Obama understands that there is a fragile, very, very fragile consensus within the Democratic Party. There is an enormous amount of tension between the different factions and alliances that make up the Democratic coalition. And if Harris is seen as being anointed as opposed to chosen by the base, that threatens to upset the entire apple cart of this momentum that we're seeing building all of a sudden. And so it has to look, they both understand that this has to be something that at least gives the appearance that the base made this decision. And we've seen very quickly that the delegates fell in line. I believe 50 from 57 territories and states, delegates have said, I'm pledging my support with Kamala Harris. I'm with her. That's important.
Yeah, all the state chairs too. Leah Wright-Rigueur, it's so great to hear your voice again. I've missed you. Scholar, author, and wonderful radio guest. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right, and we're now going to segue from there to Manisha Sinha, the James L. and Shirley A. Draper Chair in American History at the University of Connecticut and the president of the Society for Historians of the Early American Republic. She is the author of The Rise and Fall of the Second American Republic, Reconstruction, 1860 to 1920, among other books. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
So as you processed the announcement yesterday from President Biden, I know one of your thoughts was of George Washington, who kind of invented what happened yesterday. But say a little bit about any connection that you see between these two.
Yes, history does not tend to repeat itself, as Mark Twain said. It generally tends to rhyme. But I do think that now that we are in an age when many of the founding principles and ideas of the American Republic, and we are on the verge of celebrating the 250th anniversary of the founding of the Republic, now that these ideas, in many respects, are being challenged, I could not help but think of the way Washington walked away from power and set the precedent of 2 terms for a president. And at that time, Washington was not the beloved founding father that we know today. He was being attacked relentlessly, especially by the Jeffersonians and including Thomas Jefferson himself. But Washington at that moment, instead of prolonging his term, walked away and decided not to run again, and handed over the baton to John Adams, his vice president. So I do think when I looked at the gracious way in which President Joe Biden put the country and the party ahead of his own personal self-interest, I could not help but think of that moment. And this is what Joe Biden has done. He has continually reinforced and invoked for us many of the ideas that we normally understood as being part of the history of American democracy.
So, by the way, I think there might be a Broadway musical about that. I could be wrong. But Manisha, we should say a little bit about Kamala Harris and her ethnicity. She's so many different things. She's potentially the first woman president, the first Black woman president, and certainly the first Desi American president. And it's that latter one that I think we're about to see something happen. And I think it might be the collective voice of a group of Americans who have become quietly more important and more significant in American politics. I'm sitting here in Hartford, where the mayor is Aruna Naralampalam. Dita Bhargava, who's a major force in the Connecticut Democratic Party, has already weighed in about this. She's been an intrinsic part of Kamala Harris's previous efforts. Maybe you could say a little bit about this, that there's a group of people who maybe haven't had a collective national moment in the spotlight. And what do you expect to see as that does happen?
Yes, exactly. And you are interviewing an Indian American who's an expert in American history in Connecticut. Yeah. So yes, you are absolutely right. I think Kamala Harris does represent all these constituencies that are literally the polar opposite of what Donald Trump claims that he stands for, right? She's a woman. She's African American. She is the child of immigrants. She's Indian American. And in many ways, not only is her identity very different from the kind of vision that Donald Trump has of the United States, but she has her own vision of the United States, which is not necessarily one in which nativism or racism or misogyny is the way to win political power, sowing political divisions. I do think even beyond the question of different identities, she represents a different vision of American society and democracy, an interracial democracy, a modern American state that protects and defends the rights and interests of the most vulnerable of its citizens.
It's interesting too when you look on the Republican side of things, and they are going to, as we now say, try to other Kamala Harris in every possible way, maybe even especially in the Desi American sense of that. And Trump has already floated the idea she might be ineligible for the presidency. She's born in Oakland. She's ineligible because her parents were immigrants or some far-fetched thing. But it was also interesting watching the Republican convention because Vivek Ramaswamy is not nothing there. I mean, he's, an important voice of their oncoming generation. But there was also a noticeable discomfort, I think, when certain members of this heavily white Republican National Convention discovered the wife of J.D. Vance, Usha Vance. There was a little bit of grumbling and stuff like that. I mean, I think we might see some fairly unattractive aspects of our understanding, even of this community, come out in this election, particularly when it starts to get heated.
Yes, this is an old trope in American politics. 1840s, the immense nativism against Irish American immigrants. We think of the turn of the century, the immense nativism against Catholic and Jewish immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. We think of the second presidential election during the Civil War of Abraham Lincoln, where they used blatant racist ideas, calling him a Black Republican and Abraham Africanus the first because he had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So race baiting and all that is old hat in American history. One would hope that we have actually evolved out of those tactics. But as Lincoln said many times, people do not appeal to the better angels of our nature, but to our most worst passions, right? And you could see that happening. So it's, again, not a question just of identity. You could have someone like Vivek Ramaswamy saying the most outrageous things and appealing to the worst kinds of instincts, even as he stands there as an Indian American. But as you remarked, the convention was very uncomfortable with Usha Vance's speech. She's a Hindu. She's not even a Christian. And when she talked about her husband cooking Indian food, vegetarian, and becoming a vegetarian for her, you could see a certain Paul in a convention which had held up signs saying mass deportations. That immigrant story didn't seem to ring very well in the convention. Again, you could see that also in Trump's acceptance speech. He begins sort of quietly, but he ends up, with a very sort of meandering and hateful speech, reminding people about the things that he stands for. So I do think this will pose a problem for the Republican Party going forth. How are they going to appeal to a broader multicultural electorate? And right now, the Democratic base is completely fired up after being sort of the Democratic Party was just seen as people just sort of gave up on the Democrats, and they were all talking about the Republican National Convention. And I think the entire political narrative has now flipped.
I've only got about 30 seconds left, but I'm going to have you take off your historian hat and put on your hat as just a person who, I don't know, think about when you were 12, 13, 14, 15. Think about this day, this idea that fairly soon it looks like a woman of a similar background to yours is going to be the nominee of a major party. I don't know. How does that just feel in your heart right now?
I feel a tremendous sense of belonging as an immigrant to the United States. When I came to this country in the 1980s, it was during the Reagan years, and I couldn't, in my wildest imagination, think about an African-American president, and then Barack Obama got elected, and I couldn't think about an Indian-American woman ever becoming the president of the United States. And I think what it does is just increase the scope of citizenship and national belongings that a whole lot of people feel. And I think for Indian Americans in particular, this becomes kind of a moment in which we sort of feel pride, but we also don't want to be behind any Indian American candidate. Nikki Haley did not get that much support from Indian Americans who tend to vote overwhelmingly Democratic. There's also a vision of the United States as a welcoming nation. And even though a lot of it is somewhat mythic, the old give me your tired and hungry idea, but that's part of what is the appeal of the United States to the rest of the world. I also grew up in a country which had a female prime minister, Indira Gandhi, for a long time. And in South Asia, we've had women leaders long before the United States. So it's not an unusual thing for me. But I remember the sting of disappointment in 2016 when we were not able to elect our first female president when Hillary Clinton lost the Electoral College, even though she won the popular vote by 3 million. The largest, winning vote for a loser in American history. Sorry to put my historian's cap back on.
That's okay.
But then we see the backlash from that. We've had a Supreme Court that has taken away essential rights from women. We as women also do not want to live as second-class citizens in this country. And so having a woman of color, a child of immigrants is just such an inspiring and such an American story. As Barack Obama said, this story could happen only in the United States.
Manisha Sinha, I have to stop you there because the woman I'm the most afraid of is Lily Tyson, and she says our time is up. Holder of the Draper Chair in American History at University of Connecticut. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we'll take a little break. We'll come back with David Folkenflik to talk about the press.
George Washington's going.
Very, very quickly, I would like to say thank you on the technical side to Bradley O'Connor and Gina Matruda, to Lily Tyson, our senior producer, for producing the show. Yesterday, everybody was on Slack planning this show today. I don't have time to thank everybody, but it was all hands on deck. Joining us now is David Folkenflik, NPR's media correspondent. He's been with us many times before. David, welcome back.
Colin, good to be here.
I love hearing that voice on my show. So, one of the really interesting things, and it started maybe with Ezra Klein in February, maybe earlier, but the press played a role in trying to shape the moment, shape the idea that maybe Biden shouldn't seek a second term, maybe there should be an open convention, et cetera. And I noticed when Biden made his announcement yesterday, he didn't send out a press release to the New York Times. He dropped the whole thing on X as a statement. And I thought that might be a little bit of Joe Biden's displeasure with the mainstream press's role in all this.
That's possible. I got to say that I think that the press has been gingerly exploring and pressing on this issue throughout. And I think at the same time, you're seeing a lot of backlash against the press from, Biden fans and partisans who feel as though this man in this final chapter of a long life and career in public service is being kind of hustled to the door unceremoniously, as well as by people who may not be fans of the president or just have watched him before our eyes become ever more frail and ever less capable of doing a part of the presidency that I, in my youngest years, kind of dismissed and have become convinced over the more than, a generation that I've covered media and politics is a vital part of the presidency, which is the ability to communicate and to convey to a country a direction, a sense of purpose and mission in a way that Biden has been able to do on occasion, but has really not done so much. And, it's hard for me to feel that him posting this on social media is as a result of being a ticked off at the Ezra Kleins of the world, when for much of the last several years, he's really avoided the mainstream media. One of the real problems with what happened in that debate in late June, Colin, was that it wasn't, a terrible night out of 40 that he had done over the past 6 months or a year, with a slew of public interviews on broadcast and cable TV, a bunch of sit downs, some public, town halls and, various public speeches. They were parceled out fairly stingily. And so it meant that you were grading it as in a circumstance in which there weren't a lot of other exams to or entries to compare it to, right? Like this was a big moment and we hadn't had a lot of them. So it wasn't one of many. And I think that the effort to be sort of yes, to speak in some modest number of campaign appearances, but to really speak privately, to be a huge meme winner with the Dark Brandon viral videos and sort of jokes slapping back and snapping back at Donald Trump, it didn't do enough to convince us. So yes, I think one can say that the press played a role. And I think we shouldn't forget that the press in many ways ends up being a political actor, even in ways in which it's not always realizing it's doing so. And there are reasons why I think that happened that way. We can explore those. But in answer to your question, I think this is sort of a multi-directional relationship and dynamic. And I think, to be honest, Biden failed to convince people that he was up to the task because he hadn't done so prior to the night on which he really disintegrated a bit for those 45 minutes, the first half of that debate.
Yeah, just getting back to a thing that you said a couple of seconds ago. Yeah, the press is often in this odd position of trying to do play-by-play from the booth, but also trying to ref the game. And I think one of the things that will happen now is that people will say to the press, okay, you covered Joe Biden's incapacity or feebleness to death, and at the expense of covering Donald Trump's similar kinds of problems. How about telling that story now? What are your thoughts there?
I said in the months leading up to this, when people would ask me about covering Joe Biden's fitness for office, I said, I think that it's absolutely fair to examine the physical capacity and mental acuity of President Biden and to examine the physical capacity and mental acuity of former President Donald Trump. I think that's absolutely fair game. Now that Biden is out of the race, were Donald Trump to win election at the end of his term, he would be the oldest president ever to hold office. And he is not known for cogency. He's not known for the clarity and coherence of his expressions and flights of fancy. He doesn't always land the airplane rhetorically when he's, taking a flyer and going off the teleprompter. And it's worth understanding how his mind works.
I mean, as of today, he is now the oldest presidential nominee in American history because Biden has never been nominated at his age.
Fair.
So
yeah, that's
fair.
right.
So I only got about 30, 40 seconds left, and you as a radio person understand that. But another thing will be reffing or trying to at least moderate the way that Harris is covered, and she'll be attacked in some pretty visceral ways from the right. How do you see the press's role there, David?
We have a record of the Biden-Harris administration. We also have her record in the Senate and as Attorney General to see if there are differences in how she approaches things like foreign policy, regulation of the huge digital giants in Northern California, where she got her political start, of labor questions and the working class or electric vehicles and the like. There's a lot of matter there to look at. I think that the press should focus hard on the record we have in front of us. We don't simply have to guess about where she might be headed.
All right. That's the iconic David Folkenflik, NPR's media correspondent. Great way to end the show today. Thanks to those of you who listened. Thanks to all of the people here in this building who helped. And there were a lot of them yesterday. And we'll be back tomorrow with an all-call show. It'll be just you and me.
See the flowers, live the moment, 'cause we're here forever. Stop the presses, smell the coffee, hear the music, and come enjoy the rain. Stop the presses, sing the flowers, live the moment, 'cause we're here forever.